Hello and welcome back to What Is It About the Weather? This week, that weather forecast is just plain wrong. Okay, so since we last talked, I know that in my neck of the woods there's been a lot of heat. I hope wherever you are, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, that if you're in, as we get into these kind of core seasons, if you don't live in the tropical band, that is, that, when the coldest temps are hitting us and the warmest temps are hitting us, that you're able to get out of the extremes or avoid other extreme weather. Unfortunately, some folks in India and China weren't so lucky. And India had another day with just massive amounts of lightning deaths. China with a impressive tornado that killed, I believe, somewhere above 50. I don't remember what the final tally was. I think it was thankfully less than 100, but just an incredible thing. That these are stories that those of us who, live in the Western Hemisphere until recently, with the internet the way it is, you may never have heard these stories. So it's tough to say whether it's an abnormal thing or not in some of the cases. But links in the show notes. Not going to spend a lot of time on those. Summer solstice, I have trouble getting that word out of my mouth lately, and strawberry moon. I don't know if any of you had any fun with that in the past few days. It's an interesting thing. I heard every 50 years, every 70 years. Yeah, it really doesn't matter. It's still just, it was a full moon that happened to happen on the day of, when the sun did its thing as far north kind of as we get in the northern hemisphere, and it can now start going the other direction and start working on winding down summer, even though we're just getting started with it, and work its way back south now. I did put some pics on the website if you're interested. We had, oddly enough, the sunset was what was probably more impressive, but it was kind of interesting on the moonrise with the cloud setup in the Atlanta area. It did kind of have a pinkish hue. So check out the website. I did a post that I didn't put in the feed, so you wouldn't have gotten it otherwise, but that has about 20 of my favorite pictures. One of those days, any of you who are following me on Twitter or Instagram or the other ways know that I do like to post weather pictures or when I have them and am able to take pictures of weather events. I like to share those things. So, do follow me there and you can see more. But again, that day I had so many pics to go through, I couldn't believe it. It was probably on the order of 100, 150, and usually I can easily take 90% go out of focus, bad shot, nothing interesting. But this was one of those days. It was like, wow, I just kind of want to keep all these things. So I guess the other interesting thing lately, as many of you know, that the hurricane season in the Atlantic always gets a lot of press in the U.S., and I know it does somewhat in Europe as well, because the storms actually ultimately can impact Europe. But this year in particular, because we're heading into, theoretically, we're heading into a La Nina-oriented year, although the magnitude and if it really happens still kind of TBD, it's certainly more likely that we're going to have a busier season than a not busy season, or it's seeming that way. But everybody's focused on, was the earliest a third storm had been named and the earliest a fourth storm had been made. But we're talking like a day or two. And when you're talking about a tropical cyclone season, and when you're talking about how that impacts the rest of tropical cyclone season, it doesn't. So, but I also understand why people do it, because on a boring weather day in different places, sometimes you need something to engage an audience. So I get why people bring those up. But statistically, don't get hung up when you hear those things. Go, oh, that's interesting, and move on, and appreciate the fact that whatever meteorologist sent it your way was just, they were sharing a useful tidbit, like sometimes I do in the podcast. So, all right, so let's dive into things. So you heard it. That weather forecast is just plain wrong. Now, if you expect a meteorologist to give you a number for the high temperature and low temperature and whether it's going to rain or not even a probability of rain, whether it's going to rain or not, and a specific number, and I will tell you that forecasters in the U.S. actually have it much worse than in Europe, because Celsius, if I say 18 Celsius, there's a lot more leeway in when you look at rounding and stuff, that might be right. But single value forecast, if you really go and calculate how often they're right and wrong, quite often are wrong. If you look at a 5-day forecast and even look for tomorrow, and wherever it's TV or internet, however you get in your forecast, they go, all right, the high tomorrow is going to be 85, and the low tomorrow is going to be 36. Or if you're in Europe, it's going to be a high of 25 and a low of 13 or whatever it might be. Quite often it might be 26 and 12, or it might be 87 and 52 or whatever on the flip side of that. And does that make it a bad forecast? Not necessarily, but if you took that forecast at face value, it's an incorrect forecast. And I think most of us that consume weather forecast don't necessarily think of that as wrong. And I think a lot of those forecasters, when they do verification and whatnot, they give themselves some leeway, and I think you do too. But let's now get into why they're really not even giving you a single forecast when they're doing that, and why you should actually prefer more probabilities as opposed to less. Now, we talked about this back in I think it was the April 22nd or something around that, when we talked about flooding and probabilities and why they're your friend and why you should want them and why it's a good thing, but also the importance of understanding what that information is and what it's telling you. And I'm not going to delve into it too much again. So if you haven't listened to that episode, do listen to it, or at least go into the show notes and click on some of the links and do some quick reading. But what is important that came out of that is two things. One, probabilities are good. It's not a bad thing. It's not because someone's not giving you a firm answer isn't a bad thing. And two, though, you need to understand the probabilities that are being given to you and what they're based on. So let's go back to a little bit about the fundamentals, deterministic versus probabilistic, okay? So probabilistic forecasts have been going on a long time. Just because you see a number that says, okay, the high today is going to be 85, doesn't mean that meteorologist or whoever's giving you that information hasn't looked at a lot of different models, or models that have been doing, and we've mentioned this term before, ensemble-based forecasting, where they give you that same model generates multiple outcomes and gives you an opportunity to see how similar those outcomes are if you tweak different things. Now, a deterministic forecast and giving you one, and you looking at one and saying, just give me that number, it's quicker, okay? But it's always going to be less accurate. Now, again, not necessarily something you need to worry about. Most of the time it may be fine, right? Tomorrow you're going to be working in an office. Okay, so tomorrow you're going to be outside. So actually tomorrow it might not be a good day. But Monday, so Sunday night you're looking at the forecast, and you're going to an office the next day, or you're going to be sitting in the house the next day, or you've already got your day planned out. And the only thing you need to know is the 10 seconds that you're going to be between your car door and something else, maybe if it's going to rain or not. Okay, so for a lot of us that work every day, that's all that you really want to know. Maybe you need to know how warm it's going to be from a closed standpoint, but if you're going into a climate-controlled environment, that may or may not even be relevant. I mean, I know lots of people that if they hear 85, they may wear a shorter sleeve shirt to work, but then they get to work and the air conditioning is turned down so cold that they need a sweater anyways. So you've always kind of done some adapting to the environment, but there's always going to be times, whether you're planning an event, you're going to be doing some outdoor activity, or you're going to be in places where weather is going to influence your life on a more routine basis. Now, this is true for consumers, but understand that businesses have also been doing this for a long time, and that's kind of the business I've been in for the last 9 to 10 years is probabilities. But what's really all the point of this, and why is it so important? So, it is important enough that the American Meteorological Society back in 2008, and you can, again, show notes, there'll be a link to this kind of statement they made about probabilistic forecast and why it's important. So again, kind of reviewing that very basically, it's a reflection of uncertainty, or how certain the forecast is, or as well as confidence. But it's also a reflection of your exposure to risk, and that's where I'm getting into. While most days it may not matter to you, the day that you're planning to have a wedding, okay, and you have it set up for an outside venue, but most of these places have an option of inside-outside if they do an outside wedding. And 3 days out, you might be, there are things that may be harder to coordinate if you don't make that decision in advance. And so you can't always leave everything to the last minute. Or you're planning to go to a theme park, and or spend some outdoor time, whether it's skiing in the wintertime or, go on the lake in the summertime. And, if you're going to lose a weekend because it's even too hot, not even necessarily precipitation, but it's too hot or it's too cold, and you could have easily shifted it to the next weekend, that's important information. But you may not always have certainty. How often do you hear meteorologists? Like I said, you don't hear them with rain. They've always, for a long time, been doing probabilities. You don't see them. It's either going to rain or it's not. Okay, so we've been using probabilities there. So what you're doing is they're trying to help you quantify what's the uncertainty, okay, or the certainty, either way you look at it, the confidence they have in a forecast. From your standpoint, you're looking at your risk exposure, and we have this every day individually, okay, different things, but sometimes it's important with weather. You're trying to make better decisions. Now, let's look at a non-weather example. All right, so let's take people, and a lot of people around the globe do this, commute to work in some way. Not everyone does, but it's something I think a great many people can relate to. And you kind of know how long it's going to take you every day to get there if you leave at a certain time. And you've left at different times, and you kind of know maybe what traffic patterns are like or where the tricky parts are. And you also know that for the most days, it is what it is, or as we say in Chile, es lo que hay, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. So what you're really trying to do is, on important days, though, maybe a kid's got soccer practice or an after-school event you need to be at, or you got an early meeting, right, that you've got to make it to, and you need to be there, because that is a case where you cannot be late, because it's going to start and people are going to expect you to be there. So more often than not, you use the probabilities that you've built up in your head over time, your statistics, your internal statistics, and you say, okay, I know that if I wait till 7 in the morning to leave my house, there is a good chance I will make it on time, 80% of the time. And that's why maybe you leave there every day at 80, because it doesn't matter. But that one time when you've got a first meeting that you've got to get to, or again, you're leaving at the end of the day and there's an event you need to get to, you're likely going to shift your leave time if that event is important enough to you, that being a key thing, because you're mitigating your risk. Now, you may end up early. And again, the statistics may tell you the majority of the time you're going to end up early, but you also know that there are times that if you don't give it a little extra time and there is an extra wreck or those sort of things take place, and that always adds 10 more minutes to your commute, that you're trying to eliminate that risk in your equation or minimize it to the best you can. Now, and it's a flip side. So if you leave early and you get there and you're late, but people understand you left early, they're more likely to forgive you as well. You can say, not only did I leave early, but traffic took, 10 times longer than it normally takes. So we do this in other things. We do it in a lot of the decision processes. And like I said, weather may not influence every decision you have, but when it's influencing important decisions, it's better to understand the overall risk exposure. Okay, and that risk equation includes this confidence, this uncertainty in when you're making decisions. Now, here's the reality and why we can't give you a deterministic forecast to get back to it. I was walking through, my living space earlier, and I was thinking to myself, I wonder if I could model that. I wonder if I could put there's not much going on, it's inside. But you think about how tiny, molecule of air is, and whether the air conditioning is going to turn on, when it's going to turn on. So if I wanted to track where, like if I released a little small particle and figure out where that's going to be at the end of the day, what are the complexities going on? What are the physics that are going on? Okay. What do I have enough data? Do I even understand all the data points that I need to make that decision? So imagine that on a much bigger scale. And as good as weather models have gotten, there's still huge amounts of data that they don't ingest. They're still very limited in their physics, but the physics are at a large level. And, I'll give you an example here. When you think about these, what we call pop-up thunderstorms or isolated showers, for those that ever experience these things, where you see one event that takes place, but it may be a huge torrential rain in a very small area. Well, the model may have seen that something like that should happen, but it also knew enough to know that that didn't mean the whole area was going to get rain. But imagine it's 5 miles away, right? And so that's a lot of times when you hear about rain probabilities, sometimes it's expressing that kind of an issue versus other times it may be expressing whether the large scale, or what we call the synoptic scale events, even going to take place in the meteorological world. So I've heard a couple of meteorologists lately, and these are fairly well-known people, and I'm not going to call them out by name, and one of these people was forecasting stuff that was 2 weeks to 3 months away, and that's what their company did. You know, they do these types of forecasts, and you know what? Their forecast was horribly wrong. It was for this past winter, and it was for the northeast, you know, the eastern and northeast U.S., and their forecast it was a complete bust. And so they sat there in one hand and said, I only like giving deterministic forecast. And on the flip side, their forecast was horrible. So the people taking that forecast, well, we all appreciate it because they're maybe reflecting in the fact that they do a deterministic forecast. They're reflecting that they're confident in it. Well, maybe they shouldn't have been, okay? And I understand what they were trying to do, and I will remind everybody that while there is value in these longer-term forecasts, and sometimes there's useful information there, these longer forecasts inherently have less confidence or more uncertainty. So if someone tries to give you a deterministic forecast based on a longer time period, they're not doing you a favor. And I would even say in the very short term, they're not doing you a favor. Now, I understand, again, tomorrow it's going to be 85 degrees or, Celsius. Let's say it's going to be, 30 degrees, whatever it is. So 86 and 30, we'll do the math. We'll keep it the same. But the problem we run into with that, right, is it's not going to likely be that number. Now, most of the people, the meteorologists, they have an audience, again, that has come to understand that 86 or 30 means, maybe 84 to 88. And, depending where you are, again, some areas have more leeway, less leeway, and that relationship is built that in over time. Or you'll even hear them say, and this is what I love, when somebody once says they want to give you a deterministic forecast, and then they'll say, it'll be around 86 degrees. Well, that's not deterministic. Deterministic's a point, okay? So maybe you are already getting probabilistic forecasting, you just don't realize it. And maybe you and that individual have enough of an understanding with one another that when they use a phrase in a certain way, it's giving you that probabilistic information. But the problem often is, and we have covered this in a previous episode as well, that those subjective terms that they use to create probabilities for you are very open to interpretation. Okay? How I may take it and ingest it may be very different than you. So what they would be much better doing is saying that the likelihood is something, the highest likelihood is something around this temperature, but it could range from here to here, but it's generally going to be in this smaller range. Now, the problem is, and this is where we get into this, is we as consumers of that information don't want to sit there and listen to this, or they don't have time on TV or radio or whatever to go and do that for every day that they're doing a forecast for. So they have to work with these deterministic data points, and I get that and I understand that. But we also live in this day and age where the supporting information, and this is where I would say that their websites or in some way, or their supporting graphics should help try to reflect that. And it's not always easy, okay? But there are ways to do it. And I've been in the business of doing that for the last, like I said, 9 to 10 years, where creating these types of forecasts is what we do. And in the business world, when people ingest forecasts, because they're making decisions based on this, they would cringe if you gave them a deterministic forecast. Yes, it's a starting point, okay? But they're looking at how different is that than usual? How likely is it to happen? They get forecasts. So, and again, they a lot of times create their own statistics because they get forecasts from multiple organizations and they compare them with one another. Now, there is dangers in that, and I'm not going to get into that today. They would be better off with getting the best forecast, but having that best forecast represent the probabilities and the uncertainties for them. That's ideally what they should want and what they should do. So, I also think another key aspect of this, though, is probabilities. If people get used to them, help reduce the cry wolf thing. Because let's get into extreme weather, okay? And I was watching one the other day, and it said 80% chance of rain, and then the rain didn't happen, and somebody went, well, that forecast was a bust. No, it wasn't a bust. Now, if they had said 100% chance of rain and it didn't rain, then it is. But what it said was, in your area, maybe you were part of the way the forecast was, we knew that some areas were going to be missed. Or maybe there are times that even though the model is suggesting that 80% of the time it's going to rain in the area, that there are cases where a number of things might come together, hence the 20% or the uncertainty that's being reflected, okay, that those forecast, it's just not going to rain for whatever reason. That's why it's 80% and not 100%. So it's not a bust. It's not a bust. But by understanding, you as a consumer understanding that, help in reducing the crying wolf thing if people give you it probabilistic to begin with. If somebody's saying, well, tomorrow we're going to have tornadoes in the area and all this, and that's what you hear, you go, oh, I'm going to have a tornado, I've got to be prepared. And they say that 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, 9, 10 times, and then all of a sudden you get numb to it. However, if they say, we've got a risk of it, and this is the probability of that risk, you understand that there's some uncertainty there, okay? So you're not going to hold them to it. But like I said, we as the receivers of that information also need to understand that all the 20% of the times that it doesn't come true may happen back to back to back. It's kind of like that 100-year flood or 1,000-year flood that we discussed. You can have 2 back-to-back years with 100-year floods. It can happen, right? So, but if they're very focused on deterministic and they tell you that there's a risk, what'll happen is your mind will say, oh, they told me there's going to be a tornado tomorrow, because they're always giving you a deterministic forecast. So it helps everybody involved if we understand that things are probabilities, and that there are cases where it's 100%, and there are cases where maybe there's a high likelihood that there really is, the high is going to be 86 tomorrow or 30 Celsius, and you know what, it turns out to be that way. But usually the information at hand that's not what it's telling us. So understand that you're better off and should seek that information, and even let your meteorologist know that, hey, help me with the probabilities here. And that's what happens a lot of times when people contact the meteorologist. They start asking them for this stuff, and you will find, like, I'm planning something this weekend or whatever it might be, and you'll find that that's actually where the probabilistic discussion happens. So like I said, there are ways to do it graphically, and there are ways that it can be communicated quickly as long as the parties understand and appreciate each other. So if you're given probabilistic information, make sure you understand it. If you're given deterministic information, understand what there is, because like I said, local television station I deal with, they verify, and I'm speaking off the cuff here, I don't know if it's plus or minus 3 degrees, but I'm sorry, plus or minus 3 degrees is not a deterministic forecast. So what they're telling you is, I'm giving you a number, but it's going to be within that range. Now that's fine as long as all the parties understand that, and that's what's critical, okay, is making sure that you're in the know of how that information is being shared with you. But again, you should want the probabilities, right? So why have, we get in this, okay, Mark, you've just ranted about, probabilities and why they're important. Well, why haven't they happened? Okay. And I talked about the visualization and maybe how hard it is to show the spread, but I want to give you a case, and just imagine, so we have this thing, and you've heard me mention it before, called the wedge in the Atlanta area. And the wedge is this flow of air that pushes down off the Appalachian Mountains, and it can result in 2 very extremely different forecasts for Atlanta. And they often don't know what the outcome's going to be. So the outcome might be 60 degrees or 80 degrees, but it's not likely to be 70. So if they took the mean, which is what people think even when they say, we do this verification, it's plus or minus, you think of a normal distribution. A lot of us have heard the word bell curve before, right? And, or being in that percentile. And you have this understanding that everything is centered around this one number. But what you don't understand sometimes is things aren't always set up that way. Sometimes it's a very skinny thing, so maybe it is close to deterministic forecast. Or maybe there's a lot of uncertainty, and that just happens to be the middle. Or maybe things are weighted one way or another. So maybe if they told you in the mean was 87 degrees or 86 degrees, what if the vast majority of the ensembles or the the different scenarios they were looking at were within, they started at about 85, but they went. Would you want to be getting a forecast that said, oh, the real risk is on the high end, and not have that communicated to you? So it's again, they may have already made that tweak for you in some way in what they've done, but if they're not sharing that information with you, it's difficult. So there are ways to visualize it, but it takes effort, and the parties need to be involved in that. These phrases that people use, and this is the challenge, and this the AMS document that I'll send you to discusses this, and we've discussed it before, is when I use the word likely or near or around, that means something to me. But if it doesn't mean the same to you, this is the danger. And that's a lot of times why representing things and people understanding the bounds and where the uncertainty is, that's important. And it gets back to this wedge case. So here it was. They told me, okay, so they picked the middle and they said 70 degrees tomorrow if that's what they had to do, right? So if I looked at a map, it might say 70 degrees, or they may hedge their bets and they may say, I think the wedge is more likely, or I think the wedge is less likely. Now, a lot of times what they do here is they go, be patient because it's likely going to be this or that. And that's what they should do, okay? And that's what you should look for, is it could be cloudy and 60 and an overcast, a little rain, or it could be sunny and 80 and a completely different outcome. And that can be very meaningful to people that are having to make, whether it's you as an individual or businesses having to make a decision about, how they're setting up their patios for serving people coffee tomorrow. Do you need to have umbrellas that people need to sit under to protect themselves from rain, or do they need to protect themselves from sun? Two different things, and it actually might influence how a business is setting up their structure for a day, or what their plans are, even in terms of offering outside seating or something along those lines, or whether it's safe for you to be outside with a thunderstorm. So again, that situation is what we call bimodal, but it really means the mean is not highly probable. Okay, so the mean may have been, like I said, a 70 to 75 degrees in the middle somewhere, and then it's going to be around 73. Well, the reality is it was going to either be around 60 or around 80. And that's why having this understanding of what's going on and seeing what the real uncertainty is and their confidence is. But the more they can do that in a way that allows you to interpret, not to guess at what they mean, the more important it is. But again, it's a two-sided street, and I get that. But I guess my answer always is with these things that when you got an important decision that you need to make about something related to weather, don't ever trust a deterministic forecast, okay? Because it's going to be wrong. It is. I promise you, because usually when you're making decisions about the weather, other than the very, 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 very short-term things, you're doing it for an event down the road, okay? Whether it's a week or 2 weeks in advance or whatever it is. So if you start, if you see somebody, there's a company that will go nameless, but you can listen to other things or see other things, that is putting out 90-day deterministic forecasts based on your location. You can go to their website, and you can get a forecast that is for a specific day, and it's going to tell you that it's going to be, a high of, I don't know, again, that, let's say 86 or 30 C, and, the low is going to be, whatever it is. And you know what? I understand enough to know that what they're doing is they're throwing up there a number that hopefully is somewhere in the range of what it's going to be, but you're given a number, and it's just that number is not useful because it's not highly accurate. We're not going to get in the whole whether that forecast is even close to accurate or not. That's not what this discussion is about. But just know, even in the short term, where we know the weather models are fairly good, that they're giving you information, and it's never precise. It's not precise because of the physics. It's not precise because of the data. The model just can't do it. It can't give you that level of precision. There's too much that goes on this planet every day that can change a forecast even for tomorrow. Okay, much less 2 or 3 or 5 days down the road. Now, there's less likely, except in certain cases, right? Like I mentioned, that wedge thing, or certain severe weather, that it's going to happen in the short term versus the long term. But that's why that curve or that distribution may look drastically different. And again, Hurricane Sandy, okay, it wasn't a hurricane at landfall technically, but one model got it very right. Okay, and another one got it very wrong. Now, in the end, they kind of came together, but it caused problems. And that's why the more information we have and the more accurate information we have and the forecasters that are helping you interpret, and again, that's their job, right, is to help interpret that for you. But if they can't communicate that uncertainty, it's not giving you the information you need. And that's an important piece. And so, work with, if you're finding that you like somebody, but they're not giving you that information, ask them why, or talk to them and help understand why they're not doing it, or if they think they are, why you're not interpreting that way. I know I'm trying to create this whole dialogue between weather consumers, but what will happen is you'll go somewhere else, and that's fine. You have that choice as well. But if it's a meteorologist you like, hopefully you are in a situation where you're wanting to understand, did you miss something, or was it something that they're just not providing for you? And in this day and age, with whether it's you're watching live or you're watching online, and in particularly online, if they're delivering the forecast to you online or you're consuming it that way, the ability to support that with supporting graphics to give you that detail, it can be done. And so hopefully they're starting to provide that information for you, and you're seeking it out already. So start with the important dates, but just realize that there's no day that it shouldn't exist, because any day, while it may not be important for you, it's important for somebody else. So it just should become part of the routine. Again, my humble opinion here. And do keep in mind, and I think the interesting thing that a lot of people don't realize is businesses have been doing this for a long time. So you may have heard recently that the weather company was bought by IBM. Okay, and people go, well, I don't get it. Well, it gets into this whole big data thing and analytics, but tons of decision making is done based on weather influenced events. So some of it's longer term, like let's say there's a heat wave projected for upstate New York for next week, okay, late next week. And Home Depot only has, I don't know, so many air conditioning units that they keep up there. I'm talking like in window type stuff, or in an in-room type thing, based on a normal summer. And they see this thing and they can make decisions about relocating stock that maybe didn't sell in another area, and can think about that process. But you as a consumer can do the same thing. You can realize, hey, what is the real uncertainty? What is the real likelihood that this event may happen and that I might need to be prepared? So I want to go out and get one now before the shelves are empty, okay, if they're not going to make that choice. So it's a full circle thing. And it can happen with, I don't know, ice cream for, it's a projected hot weekend and they know everybody's going to ice cream. So they, the stores get supplied more, and you've already got yours, or you make sure that you get it ahead of time. This is what happens with these events. But imagine ice storms in the Southeast. If stores could, just because the word ice storm comes on, see, here's the problem. They probably don't want me telling you. So all the water goes, all the milk goes, all the bread goes. Well, imagine if they could stock properly, because they could redistribute, because they know it's coming from one of their other locations. Okay, or their supplier can give them additional milk or whatever it is. That's what that's how the analytics in the long term are going to help in all the supply chain and everything else, as these forecasts and the ability to analyze all that data become more granular, and they're able to do it. But you as a consumer can benefit in the same way, right? So in the end, what we really want is you're not going to the supermarket just because the word snow got mentioned on the news. I know all of you people in snowy areas are going, you Southeast people are crazy, but it's a reality, and it happens. So the more you understand, okay, and the more you know that it's going to happen because of the way it is. But if everybody works together, then the probabilities play out, and it's less likely anybody's caught off guard. Okay, so they're your friend. Probabilities are your friend, and that's what you want. And I walked around. I met yesterday with a podcaster I have a great deal of respect for, Father Roderick. You've heard me mention before. Again, go check out sqpn.com. Again, I promise you won't be hit with faith. You'll be hit with all sorts of neat topics that are kind of fun if you're interested. But I was, we were talking about different episodes and things, and I was thinking about this as I'm walking around, just rambling to myself about how I was going to communicate this stuff. And of course, I have my notes here, but it didn't come out anything like even I thought it would as I was sitting down and recording. But what I know is all these things open doors, and each one of these things open doors. And weather models are like that. Each time they're run, it's a array of doors that they open, future things, or if you want to get in the sci-fi world, alternate universes and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is sometimes they're very similar, okay? And it's not going to be an impact for you. But sometimes when those models run, they point to very, very, very different outcomes, and that may be very meaningful. It could be meaningful for you on a special day, okay? Or plans that can get, who wants to be the vacation that got ruined or whatever it is, if you can avoid it. And even knowing which days on a vacation are going to be good indoor days versus outdoor days. All that can be, in planning accordingly. It seems like, you thought about it in advance and you work it out. Or it could even be a life-saving scenario. So just keep in mind that the probabilities are working, they're happening whether you absorb them or not. So the more you understand that they're happening, the more effective of a decision you'll be able to make when weather is impacting a key decision that you're trying to make. Like I said, it's going on in business all the time, and for some consumers, but it's happened less on the consumer front. But there's no reason it shouldn't, and that's kind of why I wanted to share it with you. So probabilistic forecast, plain and simple, make you smarter, okay? You're absorbing of it, then being delivered to you, you become a more intelligent consumer of weather information. All right, so there you go. That forecast was wrong. If it was deterministic, it probably was. If it was probabilistic and done well, hopefully not. Hopefully it was dead on, and it's dead on every single time. So, as we're talking about extreme weather lately, and I mentioned lightning, so my interesting tidbit this week is you've always heard the phrase, lightning never strikes twice. And I love going through old weather myths and that sort of thing. And there's actually, I came across a Mythbuster episode, I never knew this got done, where they show the Sears Tower, I don't think it's called the Sears Tower anymore, in Chicago being struck by lightning twice in the same storm. So there you go, and I'll put a link in the show notes. Lightning can strike twice. All right, so let's wrap up. Future episodes, I'm going to do, I think, weather and music next time. So we've done weather and movies. Let's get back to the entertainment world and do some weather and music. And again, I've mentioned this previously with the video, weather and routers and what in the world they have to do with each other. We'll do that in the You Ask, We Answer section this coming week. So finally, summary since we last really talked about it. We continue to get more listeners and viewers, and that's great. And I sent, for those of you who again are connected to me on Facebook or Twitter or any of those, or even Instagram, I put the map out there. We're down to just a few states, and we get more countries. And we had some listeners join us from Luxembourg and Idaho and Louisiana and some of the states we don't have. So I haven't figured out a way to get the map easily on the website. But if you're interested, go through my Twitter feed and you can see it wasn't too long ago. As always, whatisitabouttheweather.com. I've started a Twitter account for the podcast. I really haven't promoted that yet. Is with all these things, because it really is just me, keeping up with all these things, both my personal stuff and the podcast, vidcast stuff, it's a lot of work, as you can imagine, much less trying to do anything else like maintain a job. So I've put it out there. If you're interested, follow, or if you want to just continue to follow me, that's fine too. We'll figure out how to communicate best, and it's an evolution process. We're learning to communicate better with each other. But don't forget, YouTube's out there, and the reason I mention the YouTube is I do put these short videos on there. Sometimes they're weather events or little blurbs that come into my mind that when I'm thinking about it that don't justify a full episode. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, if you like kind of weather stuff, whether it's short little lightning videos or whatever it might be, do take a look at the YouTube page and think about subscribing there. Finally, the support piece, as I've mentioned, RSVP, rate, share, validate, and pledge. And I'm gonna say just very briefly that what's most important in all that right now, I think the most important thing is probably the sharing. It's getting it out there, whether, again, you tell, and it's been great. People have been mentioning it, and I've seen emails and all that stuff. I can't thank you enough for that. So that's the thing that you can do first and foremost. Again, show somebody how to listen to a podcast and say, hey, here's the first podcast you ought to listen to if it's somebody not doing it. Because, this podcast, my goal is not to reach a particular generation, it's to reach everybody. And so while the younger generation may be, oh yeah, I get this, that, and the other, not a big deal. Some of the older generations don't even, the podcast, the term still is unfamiliar to them, but it's not complex. And we both know it's not complex. So you can listen on the website. You don't have to go anywhere else. You don't need a podcast. It just, whatisabouttheweather.com, and tell them that. And then, if they, at the same time, if somebody's interested in podcasting, you can say, hey, and let's set you up and do that. So I am going to, in terms of the support, we've gotten a few supporters on Patreon. I didn't expect that to go into overdrive anytime soon. That'll happen slowly and organically over time. But I am going to try to do a story. I've mentioned doing the T-shirts in a couple places and some other things. Just as a way, again, everybody needs shirts and mugs and stuff. It could be a way to do some small support that you can and get something that you need. And I get that. And again, the free advertising is not something I'm going to shy away from. And again, it's more exposure. So we'll keep doing those sort of things and looking for new ways to work together on that stuff. So thanks again for all the support. It's been tremendous. I continue to appreciate all the feedback, the show ideas, even the thoughts about what, more audio versus more video, all those things, or vice versa. I've heard it both ways. We'll continue to evolve and we'll do it together. And hopefully in the meantime, we'll all share a little bit about new things about the weather and how it impacts us all. And like I said, I learn as much in doing these things as the topics I share with you. So until next time, have safe, but of course exciting and enjoyable weather.